I first went vegan just over 3 years ago. I've never mentioned being vegan on YouTube before, mainly because I've always wanted to avoid becoming one of those preachy vegans that kind of prowls around the dairy aisle in the supermarket whispering "murderer" in the ear of anyone who dares to pick up a pint of semi-skimmed.
Milk is murder!
Yeah, none of that. Don't get me wrong, I really believe in the ethics and the health benefits of veganism, and I would love it if more people decided to give it a go, but I also believe in free choice. I mean, who am I to tell anybody else what they should or shouldn't be eating? So this video isn't going to be me trying to convince anybody to become vegan. I'm simply going to undergo some health checks and find out what impact my vegan diet is having on my health. Even though I feel good on a vegan diet, I always have this kind of nagging worry that perhaps I'm missing out on some nutrients that I should be getting, and that one day I'll get out of bed and find that my bones have disintegrated, and that I'll just flop to the floor like a jellyfish who's had his heart broken. I'm not worried that I'm missing out on certain nutrients because a vegan diet is no good. I think there's plenty of evidence to show that a vegan diet can give you everything you need. More that maybe my vegan diet isn't good enough, because that's the thing, there's plenty of conversation about what's the best diet. Is it vegan or keto or paleo or Atkins or pescatarian or whatever, name any diet you like. But I think that's the wrong question, because any of those diets can be healthy, but they can also be unhealthy. You know, you could have a whole foods, plant-based diet, nothing processed, and be vegan, or you could eat crisp sandwiches for every single meal and still be a vegan. There's obviously a big difference in the health benefits of those two diets. I wouldn't for a second say that my vegan diet is perfect. If one end of the scale is that whole foods plant-based diet and the other end is kind of meat substitutes and, you know, processed food, the sort of beige stuff that goes straight from the freezer to the oven, I'm probably somewhere in the middle. You know, some weeks I'm more this end, other weeks more this end. So I figured now is a good time to find out just how good or bad my vegan diet is, have some health checks, and then I can make any changes that I need to based on the results. I did quite a lot of research online into the best way to have these health tests and settled on a company called Medichecks. Basically, they covered everything I wanted to find out. So stuff like protein levels, minerals and vitamins, iron, cholesterol, omega-3, all that kind of stuff. But more than anything, I liked the way the process works. So what with COVID, I didn't particularly want to have to go to a hospital or a doctor's surgery or anything like that to have my blood samples taken. Medichecks have got these at-home test kits where you can just take your own blood sample and then you send it off, their doctors analyse it and give you the results. So I'm going to take both the tests and then we'll see what happens. Right, it's Monday morning. What better time to take your own blood? I feel a bit weird about doing this. Okay, so I've now got the results, but rather than me trying to explain them all and probably ballsing up the pronunciation of lots of different medical terms, one of the Medichecks doctors, Dr. Hamed Kamali, has kindly agreed to talk me through it all.
Looking at these, it's not just that they're green; they're all good, and it's all about putting them in context, really. So your EGFR is very healthy. You perfectly normal. I wouldn't say that there's anything that you should change to get that higher up. Being someone who's fit and does sport, the amount of creatinine in your blood is probably a little bit more than we would expect in someone who was slim and healthy but maybe more sedentary.
Okay.
And yours is perfectly healthy. There's nothing that you need to do. You'll probably find that if you lost a bit of lean body mass, your EGFR would go up, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're healthier or your kidneys are healthier.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely fine. Not concerned about that. I wouldn't try and alter that in any way.
Okay. Cool.
Your liver function then. So we used to use the term liver function. We now use the word liver health because it's not necessarily a reflection of the actual functions of your liver, but more of the enzymes contained within the liver. And so if there's ever any damage within the liver, which can happen from drugs, it can even happen from very heavy exercise. When I say drugs, I mean prescription medications, even antibiotics. It can happen if you've had a viral infection, alcohol, if you're overweight and you have fatty infiltration into the liver. These can all cause inflammation in the liver, which can cause the enzymes, which are generally sort of contained within the cells, to leak out into the blood, and that's what we measure. There's a normal amount of leak, if you will, and that's what creates the sort of green, the normal ranges, and yours is perfectly normal. So that's healthy liver. The amount of protein in your blood is completely normal. Now, that's not a measure of are you plant-based? Is that?
Yes, that's been just over 3 years.
We can talk about it later maybe, but we've got some idea of the sort of differences between people who are plant-based and not, and there's good and bad. But in terms of the protein levels, the only reason I mention that is because of the, I think, probably disappearing stigma about protein in the diet, in a plant-based diet. But it's not necessarily reflected in the amount of serum proteins in your blood. This is a good measure of just normal good nutrition, lack of nutritional deficiency, and also the kidneys. If you have any kidney disease and you're losing protein, sometimes the protein levels can be low. Yours are completely normal, very healthy, and your cholesterol is excellent. What we're looking at here is the levels of what we call unhealthy cholesterol. So those are the ones which have a propensity to cause atherosclerosis or cardiovascular disease, resulting in heart attack or stroke. And then we also measure the good cholesterol, which tends to actually have an opposing effect on the bad cholesterol, if you will. So it's best to take this in context. Now, all your levels are normal anyway, but we look at the ratio then, which is the ratio of your total cholesterol, which is your good and your bad, versus how much of that is actually good. And that ratio is 2.5, which is perfectly normal. But have you gone to the next step and had a look at what that means for your cardiovascular risk?
No.
No. Okay. So do you want me to do that just really quickly for you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, as expected, your cardiovascular risk is extremely low. If we, as an example, so if we took 1,000 people with your parameters that I've just put in and your cholesterol, 7 of them in the next 10 years might have developed some form of cardiovascular disease. That's extremely low. And that can be any spectrum from the very severe to just maybe symptoms of cardiovascular disease. So that's extremely low. We would say that a risk of 10% and over would be something that would mean we'd want to change something. And when I say 10%, I mean 10 in 100, and you're 7 in 1,000. So you're absolutely fine. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's sort of generally kind of associated with a plant-based diet as sort of that lower risk. Yeah.
And last time I checked my total cholesterol, it was 3, which is like the lowest I've seen of anyone really, and that's all just because of the food. I tend to eat sort of whole foods. Generally, like I said, I eat tofu, don't take many supplements at all. So yeah, it's good. It's worked. I've just ended up settling down into it really. So moving on then, we've got, we actually measure something called CRP-HS, which isn't usually measured in the NHS. The CRP we usually measure in the NHS to look for infection or inflammation. Now we've got that ability here as well, but the HS part of it refers to the fact that we actually measure it to smaller levels, because there is some evidence that CRP levels between 3 and 5 may not indicate that you've got acute inflammation or infection, but it can indicate the presence of atherosclerosis or coronary artery disease, or a higher risk of developing that. And your levels 0.22. That's extremely low levels of inflammation. So that's also very good.
That's good. Yeah, cool.
CK is normal. That's a measure of muscle breakdown. That's absolutely normal. Even if it's slightly high, that's okay if you exercise. And then we've got your iron stores, your B12 and your vitamin D. So the ferritin is a sort of reflection of your iron stores. We would say that So obviously the lower limit's 30, but we would say that for someone who was athletic, more really endurance athletes, but someone who's athletic, we would want it to be over 40. So yours is 71, and that's completely normal. There's no evidence of, sometimes it can be raised by inflammation, liver inflammation, obesity, chronic alcohol use, can be raised if you've got a genetic problem causing you to accumulate iron. No evidence of any of that. So that's perfectly healthy. A 71, I wouldn't want to push that any further. Just because the range is 30 to 400.
Yeah.
That's what that means, is that that's the normal range in which you will be healthy and it's not associated with disease. But that doesn't mean that 300 is better than 71. It won't, if anything, and in some cases that might actually be associated with increased levels of inflammation. So 71 is fine.
Yeah, because I was looking at the sort of green range and thinking, if I'm bang in the middle, that's ideal, and if it's sort of a bit low, that's sort of slightly concerning, or a bit high. And obviously with sort of being plant-based, I was kind of thinking, am I slowly on my way down? So
yeah. Worth keeping an eye on. It's also really worth bearing in mind that it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, because iron deficiency and B12 deficiency is very much existent in people who aren't plant-based.
Yeah,
it's just irrespective of your diet, you just need to be mindful of your micronutrient intake, and so yes, there's less B12 in plant-based food. However, I mean, for example, I generally get through a litre of sort of Alpro milk a day, and that's well over the amount of B12 required. So I don't take B12 supplements, and I measure my levels, and they've never been low. Your levels is perfectly sufficient. So
that's interesting, because I do take a B12 supplement, so I was kind of fairly hopeful that this one was going to be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously it's not like it's crazily high, so I don't necessarily need to stop taking that supplement. But
no, it's not going to do you any harm. We measure the levels of active B12, because there's, generally speaking, NHS, they measure the total B12, which may not reflect the amount of active B12 there. So you can have symptoms of B12 and sort of be in the normal range. So we measure the active levels. We have a threshold of around 70. There's a difference between looking for disease and looking at blood results for health. So we do a bit of both. We obviously are keeping an eye out to see if there's any evidence that you've got a problem now, but we also are keeping an eye out to make sure that there's nothing there, which means that further down the line you'll develop a problem.
Yeah.
And your vitamin D levels are 67. Do you have any concerns there? You mentioned in your email, I think, that...
Yeah, I just... obviously, it's been in the news quite a bit lately anyway, vitamin D.
Yeah.
And I guess I wasn't shocked that it was kind of low, because it's the middle of winter, and, maybe I'm outside for an hour and a half a day, but even then, sometimes it's not particularly sunny.
Yeah, and you probably haven't got a lot of your skin exposed either.
Yeah.
Face and neck.
So I guess, with that being kind of at the lower end of that range, is that something where it would be beneficial for it to be a little bit higher?
I would say that there's no benefit at your level for it to be higher, but certainly during the winter months, it would cause you no harm to take 400 units of vitamin D as maintenance. And then in the summer, if you feel that you get at it, because if you're going to be bouldering and you're going to be outdoors, you'll probably get plenty of sun exposure. But if you're someone who feels that if you have a job which means that you're indoors a lot and you don't get a lot of exposure, 400 to 800 units a day is plenty. Maintenance. If your levels were low, we would probably advocate having higher levels, higher doses. Sorry.
And what are the sort of benefits to having a good level of vitamin D, and any sort of drawbacks to having low levels?
So vitamin D has a number of sort of benefits. the ones which you talked about most recently in the media is the effect that it has in terms of maintaining a healthy immune system. It's also involved in maintaining healthy hormone function as well. So it can be associated with low levels of testosterone. Low levels can cause you to feel fatigued. It can reduce your bone health, and there also has been some evidence that improving your vitamin D levels can actually help reduce your HbA1c, which is a marker of diabetes.
Okay.
So a number of really important functions. The thing about vitamin D is that if you think about all of those, the things that it helps with, you're not necessarily going to wake up one day and think my vitamin D is low. It's a very insidious. It just happens sort of in the background, and so you can, for want of a better word, steadily feel more crap over time and not know why. So it's worth considering.
Let's have a quick look at the omega-3 one, because that when it came in, I sort of had an immediate 10-minute panic of like, oh my god, urgent remedial action required. I'm about to die. But yeah, it's the one that's kind of got the most alarming result to look at. But then, my knowledge of that stuff is pretty slim. But sort of because they're measured as ratios, does it necessarily mean that I need more of one and less of the other, or could it be kind of one of those things?
So I think you also alluded to knowing about the absolute figure or the concentration of each. So it'd be interesting to know, but it doesn't really matter. It's not going to alter what you're going to do about it. If anything, it might maybe complicate things. But the reason that it's a ratio is because they have sort of opposing effects. And omega-3 and 6, essentially, the names come from where there's a carbon double bond in their chemical structure. But they actually have very different effects. And like I said, they're quite opposing. We know... We have evidence that says really that the omega-6 tends to lead to more is associated with chronic disease, specifically cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, but also increased risk of cancer. And omega-3 tends to have the opposing effect. So that's why we measure the ratio, because even if you have a good level of omega-3, if you have very high levels of omega-6, you're still, it's the amount of omega-3 doesn't really matter. You're still it's about the quantity of one to the other. We also know that lower ratios, ideally of less than 3 to 1, do show a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease and cancers. So that's why we have this ideal ratio of less than 3 to 1. So your level was 17 to 1, okay? And so that is high. Now, the sort of immediate reaction to that is often to try and just increase the amount of omega-3. And a lot of the drive to having fish oils or omega-3 supplements has come from trying to improve the omega-6 to 3 ratio, which then will reduce your risk of having cardiovascular disease or chronic disease. But because it's a ratio, it's important to appreciate that actually you need to do both. You need to reduce the amount of omega-6 and increase the amount of omega-3. And if you do a bit of both, actually it would make a huge amount of difference to your ratio. So if we just say, for example, if we just say your omega-6 level is 17 and your omega-3 level is 1, if you get your omega-6 level down to 15 and increase your omega-3 level to 3, your ratio is 5 to 1 already. It's a massive difference, and you've only changed them a little bit. So that's why it's important to work on both. So we would say at this level that we would advise taking supplements EPA and DHA supplements. So EPA and DHA are the useful parts of fish oil. You can get plant-based versions of these, and we would dose that at 2 grams a day.
Okay. So would that be sold typically as an omega-3 supplement, or?
Yeah, but it's worth having a look on the back because of the box that you get, because actually there isn't. I've not personally found there to be a correlation between what it says on the box. So some say high strength, or the price even of the supplement and the amount of EPA DHA. Just have a look at them and see which one, what the dose is. Often a high dose one might be 400 or 500 milligrams of EPA and DHA. So to get 2 grams, you'd need to have 4 of those a day. We're not saying do that forever. It's just until you can kind of get things leveled up, maybe for 3 to 6 months, and then recheck where you are. But at the same time, to make sure you don't have to keep on doing that, I would also aim to reduce your level of omega-6. And generally that's processed foods and vegetable oils are the sort of main culprits of that. In addition to that, it'd be worth trying to add in some omega-3 foods into your diet. And on a vegan diet, certainly it's going to be things like flaxseed and chia, and hemp, things like that all really help. Hemp seeds. So it is something that we see in people who go plant-based, because they cut out they're taking out the whole food group of seafood and adding in, usually especially at the beginning, you try and make your meals like they used to be. So you'll have a lot of processed protein sources, and that's what pushes your omega-6 up. And so, it, on the whole, we see lower cholesterol levels in vegans and lower levels of CRPHS. We do see slightly lower iron levels in B12, but I wouldn't say that we see a lot more iron deficiency. And like I said earlier, higher iron levels aren't necessarily better. But we definitely see, an increase in omega-6 to 3, because there tends to be a bit of a move towards more processed foods.
I mean, I definitely feel like I actually eat more processed foods since making that transition. Also, I had 33 years eating one way, so all the kind of knowledge and stuff that I'd accrued in that time versus, not much time at all as a vegan. So I'm still kind of really finding my way, and I think stuff like this, so even the last kind of few days I've started getting some more flaxseed and that kind of thing in, because I just didn't really do a huge amount of research into what I would need to add in by taking stuff out when I made that kind of transition to veganism.
I think that's quite normal. But I think if you try and move away from trying to make your meals like they were before, then just sort of maybe starting from scratch again, and appreciating actually that there's a lot of benefit from varying your protein sources as well. You'll be surprised how you can sort of cumulatively increase the protein sources, and the foods are more protein sparse, but they're more micronutrient dense. So, if you say that meal of chicken, rice, broccoli, if you keep the broccoli, because actually per calorie, it's one of the highest foods in protein, but obviously you'd have to eat a lot of it. But if you replace that carb source with something which is maybe a mixed source of macronutrients like lentils, and then add in a protein source like tofu, you probably find that actually that meal has an equivalent amount. However, you've got a varied protein source, you've got more fiber, and you've got increased levels of, you've got increased micronutrient sources as well. Overall, you'd probably be hitting the same. You probably have slightly higher calories because the tofu's higher in fat, but you'd probably hit your protein targets with that.
It's weird. I think I felt okay about having chicken 3 or 4 times a day, but I'm very wary of kind of having too much tofu or tempeh and that kind of stuff.
Is that because is that an estrogen concern?
I guess that kind of stuff. The fact that
There's an element of processing. Yeah, there's the sort of estrogen soy side of it. Whereas I guess, yeah, I felt like, athletes had been eating chicken in huge quantities for such a long amount of time that I didn't have any real concerns there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth bearing in mind that this is a completely different topic, but worth bearing in mind that the majority of people get their chicken from, the chicken's probably what the chicken was eating probably wasn't particularly healthy in the first place.
Yeah.
And soya isn't that big a concern. It really, the phytoestrogens don't act just like estrogen. They have a sort of they're not going to cause your estrogen to go up. I eat tofu every day.
Okay.
And I have soy milk, and I don't, that my estrogen levels are completely normal. So there's animal products have probably a decent source of estrogens as well. So I think it's just it's a bit of a stigma, which again just doesn't make any sense. Just worth bearing in mind. But from a health perspective, it won't do you any harm. I think overall, in the discussion about what diet is the healthiest, it's about adherence, because irrespective of the diet, whatever it is you're doing, if it allows you to, if you can stick to it and maintain a healthy weight and continue exercising, that's healthier than trying to do a healthy diet and not sticking to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Wicked. Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate that. It's been
Anytime,
great.
Rob, no worries.
So I was really pleased that the things I was most worried about, so protein, iron and B12, were all absolutely fine. The only thing that came back as a bit of a red flag was my omega-3 and 6 levels, which it said urgent remedial action required, and made me have a bit of a panic.
I'm going to die.
But having spoken to Dr. Kamali and done a bit more research after that, I now know what I need to do in order to improve those levels, and that was the whole point of me doing these tests. These tests were never about me deciding whether to stay on a plant-based diet or go back to eating meat. I've seen quite a lot of videos in the past from people who went vegan for a certain amount of time, a year or whatever, and then they found out they were deficient in something and then said, okay, well, I'm gonna have to go back to eating meat. To me, that's a bit like finding out that you've got a minor fault in your car and just getting rid of it and getting a new car. Like, why not just fix that fault? For me, ditching a plant-based diet would be the absolute last resort. I'd only consider doing that if I'd tried absolutely everything else and there was some real concrete evidence that my health was going to really suffer unless I reintroduced animal products back into my diet, which is a pretty unlikely scenario. But I guess it depends on your motivations for going vegan in the first place. Like, if you decided to adopt a vegan diet because you'd watched Game Changers or something and you felt like you might get some health benefits from it, and then after a year or whatever you found out you had some sort of deficiency, I can see why you might decide to just jack it in. Whereas I went vegan for ethical reasons, so I'd always loved animals, and I just finally realised that eating them was therefore pretty hypocritical. My girlfriend at the time and I were about to adopt a dog, and I just thought, well, I could never eat a dog, so how can I justify eating any other animal? I literally went from eating meat like 3 or 4 times a day at that time to going vegan overnight. And yeah, I still have those same beliefs, so I've got no intention of ditching my plant-based diet. I'm just going to make a few tweaks to improve my health based on the results of these tests. Whatever diet you're following, if you want to check your health, I'll put a link to MediChecks down below. The process of taking the sample was really easy and I've got the results back really quickly. They do loads of other tests as well, depending on what it is that you want to find out. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, especially if you've made it this far. I know it's been quite a long video. Also, since my last video, we've gone past 20,000 subscribers, which is astonishing, but lovely as well. So yeah, thanks to anyone that's ever watched one of my videos, and especially those that have subscribed. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you in the future.